Sorry, I think we'll get started now. We have about 1 hour, 15 minutes for this seminar today. First of all, let me welcome you. Namaste to everyone as well. So this seminar on NCQG, or New Collective Quantified Goal, the process forward. It's based on a policy brief prepared by the Climate Finance Advisory Services. First, before we begin, I would also request our friend Bertha to just put on the slides, if that's okay. Well, this is the topic for today. I'm sure that you'll have noticed from the email that you have received. It's on the process proposal for defining the new collective quantified goal. We know that this is a very important aspect, the ad hoc work program that has been set up last year, and it's there'll be 12 TED technical expert dialogue, and 3 have already been completed. So the third one is upcoming, which will be focused on the access to finance. But this, since this topic is very important, we also think that it is important to look into the future aspect of how this will be defined. Because if I recall from the last June session, a lot of the participants weren't really very happy about the way our meeting was set up. So I think getting this process right to have achieved something at the during at least in 2024 is very, very key. So the whole of today's program seminar will be based on this. So let me once again welcome you. And I would also like to thank GIZ for their valuable financial support in this preparing this policy briefs. In fact, they have been doing this for the last few years, and we very much value their support. First, just a few ground rules that I would like to explain on this. You'll notice that this program is being recorded so that we will also be able to use this in the future. But also that at the end of this, your bottom on the right-hand side, you'll see Q&A. If there's any questions and answers that you would like to, questions that you want to write or comments, please use that Q&A icon there. Of course, there's also chat section, but we'd prefer you to do that in the Q&A icon. Similarly, it's a very basic rule that we all follow, that please mute while you're not taking the floor. But also we would like your active engagement later when the discussion takes place. Bertha, if you move on to the next slide. Let me just outline the agenda for today. First, I'll give a very brief introduction of the CFAS and also a little bit of what the CFAS has been doing for last almost a decade now. And also I'll invite one of the authors of this paper, the lead author of this paper, Bertha from Germanwatch, to give a 20 minutes presentation. Then we also have views from our experts. There will be 3 views presented today. They will have about 5 minutes. Ms. María, Lemos, González from WRI, Ms. Mahlet Eyassu from RMI, this is Rocky Mountains Institute, and also Sandra Guzmán, who is the founder of the Climate Finance Group for Latin America and the Caribbean. If you just go to the next slide. Yes, you can move on to the other one. First of all, what I would also request is for every participant, you can put your name, organization in the chat function so that you can introduce yourself in the chat, who you are, where you come from, and which organization you belong to. I think that'll be helpful for every one of us to know your presence, and also letting others know about your interest in that. Just to give very brief introduction about the CFAS, it's Climate Finance Advisory Services. It was launched in 2013 with the support from the Climate and Development Knowledge Network, which still continues to support. And there have been partners from both from global north and south, including organizations like Germanwatch, CARE, myself, my organization, Prakriti Resources Center, and the GreenWAC. Well, the objective was to help negotiators, especially in the theme of climate finance negotiators, or the board members of the different funds like United Christian Fund or the Green Climate Fund, and also working with members from the Standing Committee on Finance, and basically targeting the Global South in the region of least developed countries, small island developing states, and African states. Some of the activities, just to say what we have been doing in the past, is providing technical support, as I said earlier, to our strategic country partners, but also providing some real-time this support to the board members of the GCF and the Adaptation Fund, or these member of the standing committees. It's about, we call them also the friends of the of CFAS. But then you'll have noticed that if you have followed the list of CFAS, you'll have received the these briefings of all the meetings from the either from Adaptation Fund or Standing Committee of Finance and Green Climate Fund. If you have not done, you can definitely go to the website and also put in an email address. We'll get the updates of all these meetings, which is very handy. In fact, if you want to also have a record of what has happened in the past, and there are also the past policy briefs and all these briefings in the website. And finally, of course, that for last few years with the support from GIZ, we have been publishing or working on the policy briefs. At least we work with 2 policy briefs each year, and this has been going on for several years. And again, thanks to the support from the GIZ. Well, that's the brief introduction of the CFAS. Of course, if you have any want to know more information, you can always contact us, and we'll be happy to direct you to the right information on our website or provide you further information. Thank you very much just for the introduction and the part of the CFAS. But now I will move on to our main presentation for today's seminar. And let me invite Ms. Bertha Argueta from Germanwatch to give us the presentation on the proposed NCQG process going forward. As I said, this is a very critical process. We want to see not just in 2022, but also looking into 2023, how the process must go. And I'm sure that you all are there are many experts, I can already see them. They'll have the views and also good interactive sessions towards the end of this seminar. Thank you very much. And then now I give the floor to Bertha, and you'll have 20 minutes. Please
Thank you, Raju. Thank you, Raju. I hope you can all hear me and see my presentation. I'll start with a brief introduction of the NCQG, which of course, most of you probably already know very well, but it's always good to start from the beginning. As you know, it was as part of the Paris Agreement, or the adoption of the Paris Agreement, that it was agreed that prior to the 2025, a new collective quantified goal should be set from a floor of $100 billion per year, and that it should take into account the needs and priorities of developing countries. And as we see in the discussions and in the process that we've proposed here, this particular part, the needs and priorities of developing countries, are very much part of everything that we propose in this process. Later on, of course, and more recently, as part of the COP26 in Glasgow, the ad hoc work program for the establishment of the NCQG was launched for the period 2022 to 2024. And this, as Raju mentioned briefly in his introduction, is it's set up in a way that includes 4 technical dialogues per year from 2022 to 2024, meaning that there's going to be 12 technical dialogues until the NCQG is finally decided. Apart from the technical dialogues, as you know as well, there is two rounds of submissions that have been included in this process. Both of them have already passed. One was expected at the first quarter of 2022, and the second one on the third quarter of 2022. Additionally, there are expected to be 3 high-level ministerial dialogues at the end of each year. None of them have happened so far, so we're still waiting to see what the first high-level ministerial dialogue will look like and how it's going to be arranged. And then finally, of course, there is the CMA decisions and their further guidance as stock taking of the process for every year, and further guidance for the process, the technical process for the later years, 2023 and 2024. So that's more or less how it's been set up, or was set up at Glasgow. And so far we've had, as you know, 3 of these technical dialogues, the most recent one of them organized a few weeks ago. As Raju also mentioned, after the second TED, especially in June 2022, there were some participants that started expressing the need to outline a more clear process that would provide, well, clarity, but also space for what people saw as the need for a deep dive into the many, many issues that have been identified, not only through the dialogues themselves, but also through the submissions that have been received by for the process by parties and non-party stakeholders. Of course, the idea was also, or at least expressed by some participants, to have more clarity on milestones that the process could achieve in order to like move towards, the structuring of a goal. So we have tried to, we acknowledge that in the most recent TED, there's been some attempts by the co-facilitators of this process to try to like respond to this need by organizing deep dives into specific topics and provide more clarity, but we still feel that the process could be better structured in a way that responds to these needs expressed by participants after TED 2. And in the process that we are proposing, we have considered, for example, certain things that respond to what we think should be the nature of this process that we are proposing. For example, of course, we know that a final decision won't be made until 2024. And so we've taken into consideration this notion, of course, that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, which is kind of a truism that gets repeated a lot. But we acknowledge that it's important to remain flexible on what's being decided, on what these milestones that we are proposing might include until the final goal is actually decided. But we think that even though this is probably the case, and it's often the case in UNFCCC processes, the NCQG is shaping up to be quite complex. It has a lot of different parts, a lot of different potential sub-goals, a lot of different features that need to be discussed. And so for all of these many parts and features to really be discussed and engaged with at the technical level especially, we think it requires a stepwise approach that ensures that all topics are addressed and that the outcome is a good reflection of and a good balance between the different views that have been expressed so far. And this is like also kind of a lesson from the 100 billion goal, which was obviously not something that follows such a process. And so we think that this type of process is important for a better outcome of the end, at the end and a better establishment of a goal. So the proposed process does try to give certain predictability, but tries at the same time to remain flexible, because we acknowledge that what we have proposing here is not exhaustive and that there might be other topics, other issues, other disagreements that might come up. But we do think that some predictability is important also to facilitate preparations for the upcoming TEDs, especially the technical dialogues, both in terms of, ensuring that the process has or includes all the stakeholders that are relevant. And as you know, the ad hoc work program has tried to be very open and open to all different views, private sector, civil society, apart from parties. And so we think that more predictability that can ensure as well that the program can include all of these different stakeholders when it is relevant, but also to have a clear view of what types of technical inputs are important for every one of the steps of the way in defining this goal. So this is kind of a very complicated view, but this is kind of just to give an idea of what we mean when we say the NCQG is shaping up to be quite complex. And what we're trying to do here is to try to give an overview of all of the different parts that have been included in the discussions and in the submissions, starting from the Glasgow decision, that has already outlined issues like scope, quality, sources, access, transparency, quantity, and we've tried to organize that around the very specific things that have already been identified through the dialogues and the submissions, and to try to organize them a little bit. As I said, it's not exhaustive, like some things might not be here, but we think this is like a first overview of what this goal will have to include at a minimum, like variably. So in terms of scope, as you can see, I hope, we have two parts. One of them is obviously the part that deals with flows from developed to developing countries. And then we have separated this part from all the rest of the financial flows in line with Article 2.1c of the Paris Agreement. We have also tried to identify different let's say, topics of elements of quality that need to be addressed. Also how to address sources and reflect these sources and instruments and models that are linked to the idea of these sources. Also features of access, so different elements of access, and also different elements of transparency. So we've begun with this very broad overview of the different elements, because from then we have tried to structure a process, a step-by-step process, where we hope that all of these different elements will be addressed, and technical level agreements, because obviously the agreements will be at the political level, but at least some technical level clarifications can be provided through the process for then the high level and the CMA discussions to address these at a more political level. So, I mean, we can spend a lot of time on this, but I hope you can see it as well in the brief in more detail, all of the different elements that we have identified in this part. So moving from that, then what we've tried to do is to identify what the key, let's say, intermediate decisions of the CMA could be that could give clarity and structure to the process, and then move towards from there to the technical and then the high level to try to structure a process that would address all of the elements that I presented before. So we think in our understanding on how to structure these and address all of these elements, that the first key question that the CMA at COP26 at COP27 should address is a question of scope. And by that, what we mean is, the overarching question here would be, what does it mean that the NCQG is a collective goal? Keeping in mind that obviously we are working in a context in which there are differentiated obligations and expected contributions from different parties. But at the same time, the goal itself is established as a collective one. And so what does this collective mean? The underlying question, of course, in here, if you think about how the conversations have been shaping up, is what is the NCQG? Is it Article 9? Is it developed to developing countries? Does it include all financial flows? And what is the relationship between these two separate articles and therefore separate, let's say, obligations? So our proposal is to address both, but to address them separately as two different components of the goal, with the sole purpose, of course, of having very clear roles and responsibilities for each component. So we would have one that obviously is focusing on flows from developed to developing countries based on the needs and priorities of these developing countries, as was established in the Paris Agreement decision. And then a second one, which will be focusing on all the other financial flows, and committing all parties to making these financial flows consistent with the Paris Agreement. We understand that there is ongoing discussions about how this is, for example, recently in the Standing Committee on Finance, what's the relationship between these two? Some people consider that Article 9 is part of 2.1c, etc. What we've tried to do here is to just basically differentiate them so that the responsibilities are clear, as it is stated, in all of in the convention and the Paris Agreement. And from that original decision, that original milestone, then we would separate, the technical dialogues could be separated in how to answer these questions, basically. And if you see here, for example, we have provided some initial, let's say, ideas on what the TEDs from next year onwards can focus on based on this initial, let's say, CMA decision. And so to get more detail, we think that for 2023, in answer to that initial decisions, some key discussions will, for example, focus around a consideration of balance between a well-structured goal that addresses all the different needs and priorities of developing countries, while at the same time having the right level of complexity so that the goal can be implementable. Because we understand that you could, and the discussions kind of indicate that you could separate this goal into many, many, many different sub-goals. But at the same time, there is a consideration of the right level of complexity that needs to be thought of in order for this to be truly implementable, because otherwise it might be too complex to implement if we have too many separate goals. The second one, of course, is the use of available information, and there's already been a lot of discussions about these. You know, like top-down, bottom-up sources of information, how we go about finding the information to define the needs and priorities of developing countries for what we propose as a first component. And a technical dialogue could be focused only on these questions, but also on, like, you know, addressing the challenges that all of these different sources of information have. We know that bottom-up has a lot of challenges in terms of like how complete this information can be. So, you know, a proposal on how to utilize best all of the available information, it's a discussion that we consider needs to be had. Based on that, we could also see what the potential sub-goals could be, and whether and how these could be quantified. So, for example, and always keeping in mind that we're responding to needs and priorities, of course. And so some of the potential sub-goals that we have seen in the discussions are, of course, mitigation and adaptation, but people have mentioned also capacity building, technology transfer, all the traditional ones, and then, of course, loss and damage and just transition. And this is some of the ones that have been mentioned, but not all of them, of course. We'll see that obviously there's other potential things that will need to be addressed in terms of access, but right now we're just focusing on, you know, these ones that are more quantifiable in a sense. But whether they are and how to quantify them it's a question that is also for the technical level to address. Then, of course, we think there is the question of the balance between adaptation and mitigation, and we have brought this question because we understand that this is a very important question, especially for developing countries, and has been one of the key asks that we've had in the context of the 100 billion goal to try to achieve a balance between adaptation and mitigation. We have added it here because we consider that if we have a goal that is based on needs and priorities, it is less clear how a balance between adaptation and mitigation can or should be achieved. Because if the needs said that adaptation should have more or less finance, it's less clear why we would have a goal of balance between adaptation and mitigation. It made total sense when we had 100 billion, which was not enough to cover the adaptation or mitigation needs. But if we are looking at a needs-based goal, we need to reconsider the need to have this very strict balance. And then, of course, something that has been brought up a lot in the discussions is the dynamic nature of the needs and priorities of developing countries, and whether and how the NCQG should reflect these needs. And this comes down to the question of, do we establish one goal at the end of this process and that's it, like it was with the 100 billion? Or do we need to explore the possibility of this being a goal that is reviewed cyclically? And so it might have an end date at some point, a time frame, but it might also require cyclical reviews. And then how do we establish these cyclical reviews? Do we have a permanent work program or a permanent sort of dialogue? Or do we embed these in other processes within the UNFCCC? Many have mentioned, for example, the global stocktake as a way to embed these reviews of the NCQG in a cyclical process. So this is also like something that the technical level could explore. And then leaving that first component, we would move, for example, to the alignment of other financial flows with the Paris Agreement, how to achieve these and how to word these within a UNFCCC decision, considering that aligning financial flows, it's something that will require the participation and will be achieved through processes that are not within the UNFCCC. And so how to, like, you know, frame these commitments, and whether these commitments should be also quantified or not, depending on what we end up committing to within this quantified goal. And of course, some already have established certain potential links of the alignment of financial flows to issues of just transition. So it's also a link that is probably important to explore. And then let's say across all of these is obviously the issue of the responsibilities of different actors. And in here, beyond just the responsibilities of parties or the roles more than responsibilities of parties, it's also the big question of the roles of other stakeholders like the private sector, who has had a very important role so far in the discussions. And we think the best way to go about addressing the role of other stakeholders like the private sector is to do it through this process, meaning the private sector shouldn't be seen as a thing that's apart from the rest of the process. It should be seen as an actor that can contribute to the different parts of this goal. The role of the private sector can be very different in mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage, just transition. So instead of having it as a standalone topic, the idea would be for everyone, including the private sector, to address its role and its responsibilities within the different aspects of this goal. Then, of course, that's kind of what we are imagining for 2023. At the end, of course, and I want to go back maybe to the original part in here of that year, we will have a high-level ministerial dialogue. And the idea of a high-level ministerial dialogue for us, because so far no one, I think, is really clear what these high-level ministerial dialogues are supposed to look like. So what we're proposing is that the high-level ministerial dialogue should be focusing on what has been discussed at the technical level, but from the point of view of the political feasibility of technical proposals that are coming out of the TEDs, and other high-level political questions like that balance between a well-structured goal and one that is implementable, and other potential discussions like the expansion of the donor base and things that are, let's say, less hard to agree on at a technical level. So once we have that second year, the proposal is for the CMA to have a new milestone or achieve a new milestone by, first of all, considering, of course, the results of the technical dialogue and narrowing down the options that are provided by the technical level in the usual process of, like you have all of these options and then, the deliberations start to narrow down what's available from the technical level. In that sense, we consider the technical level should be able to address everything, of course, because it's technical level. And then the narrowing down is done at the CMA level. But then, of course, it needs to give more guidance to the second part, important part of this goal, which is the qualitative issues. And then we have, of course, issues of quality, access, transparency. And access and transparency we'll address later, but I think in terms of quality, a very key question here for us that it goes down to this guidance from the CMA is what is seen as the role of the public finance in the NCQG. Because when we see public finance, it usually linked to private finance, like public finance as a means of mobilizing private finance. And that's, of course, one of its roles. But it should be seen as a means to implement actions directly. It's not only there to mobilize private finance. And this obviously links to topics of quality of finance. And so we see that our proposal for this third year of the deliberations it's structured around these quality, access, and transparency issues. We do know that access is going to be the main topic of the fourth dialogue that it's upcoming. But since we don't know what's going to happen there, we've decided to still leave it in our proposed process, considering that this access issue might require a very deep dive as well in the future. And so here, the key technical discussions we imagine in this particular part is obviously quality features that have already been identified, like predictability, the effectiveness of the finance, and of course the concessionality of it, which can start by a conversation of sources, instruments, and models. And by models, we mean blended finance, public-private, etc. Coming back to this idea of where does public finance fall and where does private finance fall in all of these discussions. And then, of course, its relationship with the debt burdens of developing countries, which is an ongoing issue as well. And then access features. Last year, as CIFAS, we also published a policy brief on access. The access features, or more the challenges that need to be addressed for access have already also been more or less identified. We talk often about eligibility criteria, lack of transparency of access procedures, the discretionary and exclusive nature of certain channels, etc. So looking at those challenges, we can also have technical discussions about how to improve the accessibility of climate finance through the new collective quantified goal. So what kind of commitments need to be made in that sense? And then finally, the transparency arrangements, obviously what links how this where these transparency arrangements are going to be, framed, whether it is linked to the ETF, but as well, beyond that, other issues that should be discussed, we think, is, the ongoing long-term discussion on the definitions of climate finance. Should there be a definition of climate finance? Should we maintain definitions of climate finance? And obviously the accounting methods, including accounting methods for mobilized finance, in case this is still included in the goal. And some have suggested that accounting methods for mobilized finance, mobilized indirectly, should also be looked into, meaning not only co-finance mobilized through public interventions, but also, what kind of private finance gets mobilized through improvement in public policies, etc. So more indirect means of mobilizing finance. And with that, just to close, this is kind of like the overview of what we're proposing in here, with kind of like the key topics for each TED, high-level ministerials and the key milestones. And of course, the main milestone being the CMA 6 final decision on the NCQG, which should clarify of the elements that we have presented above, what is the final goal, what gets included as sub-goals, what are the quantified goals, what are the non-quantified, more qualitative goals of the NCQG, how we integrate access features, and where, how we monitor like the transparency arrangements for all of this. And of course, in here we've provided, because we are of the view as well that the NCQG should be cyclical and it should be reviewed. It should have a review cycle, we have also provided 2025 onwards to indicate that the NCQG should not stop at 2024, because if it is to respond to the needs and priorities of developing countries, it should also respond to the changing nature of these needs and priorities. And with that, I want to stop there and get back to Raju for the second part of our discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bertha. That was very helpful, giving the gist or the key elements of the policy brief. In fact, as I said in my opening remarks, that this is a very important topic. And if you, in case you want to have a full access to the paper, I put the link in the chat function. But if you have not received it, you can also go into cfas.info and then access the paper where you have the access to full paper. And of course, the presentation and the recording will also be put in the website after this event. Well, let me just remind you that I know if you have not introduced yourself yet, the chat function is now activated, so you can still do that in the chat function. But I encourage you to put your question or remarks or your inputs, if you have anything, into the Q&A icon that you will see it on your bottom right-hand side. Please feel free to use that. We'll come back to those questions and elements later. But now I would like to go to our expert members for their very short remarks and reflection on the presentation. This is a very important topic, and the three experts have been working on this topic, especially in climate finance, for a very long time, and they've been also organizing a lot of these seminars and discussion to have this NCQG process very focused and really something concrete at the end of 2024. Just in case you are interested in even also attending the formal TED 4, then I think you have noticed that the date for that is 5th of November. In fact, if you have just booked arrive on 5th, you may not, you may not be able to attend that unless you are arriving very early in the morning. But that's how the late date was agreed on 5th November. So that's the date for the NCQG process and access to finance. With that, now let me go to María from World Resource Institute. You have about 4 minutes to reflect and also give your input. María, you have the floor.
Thank you, Raju, and thank you, Bertha, for the very complete presentation. It was really useful. So let me start by agreeing with Raju. He said in the beginning, at the opening of this space, that one of the key priorities is to get the process right. And I think he's completely right. And that this also means to make the best possible use of the time that we have, which is very limited. to find some solutions for the complex challenges that we face within the UNFCCC and within this specific negotiation on the new goal. I think that the main challenge from our perspective is that the technical expert dialogues, as Bertha presented, are not translating yet into concrete features, into concrete frameworks and options for the new goal. And this might have different causes. One of the causes that we see is because there is a risk to go in circles without having clarity on the topic for each TED, without a format and a conducive format, without continuity in the participation of government representatives. This is also led because the reflections notes that are produced after the technical expert dialogues are not capturing the breadth and the depth of the discussions. And also because many of the discussions happening there, they turn highly political very early, or because of a lack of technical input, expert input, they cannot advance. And this is where this paper and this proposal comes into place. And I think it's very valuable, extremely valuable for the process, because it provides a way forward, a roadmap, a proposal. Countries will see how they see this fit and how they can introduce this into the negotiations. But I do think that it's critical at this point in time, because COP27, at COP27, countries can agree on a decision on how to respond to these challenges. So concretely, I just want to highlight three main strengths that I see from the presentation. So the first one is that the work presented not only highlight the elements of the new goal, but the interrelation on this. And this connects with the second strength that I see, and is that the work program for 2023 and 2024 provides coherence between the process. One of the main challenges, as I was mentioning, is that these TEDs, these technical expert dialogues, are not perceived as very well connected meetings, and this could be very useful to improve that coherence between the technical expert dialogues and also within the political aspect. Another strength that I see is the recognition of the dynamic nature of the needs and priorities of developing countries, and this idea of maybe what we do need is having a review process, because as we know, the needs and priorities will change according to the global warming scenario, meaning that as temperature increases, so will the needs. I will leave it till there, if that's okay.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you very much for those very useful and sharp comments. I think that's very key. Of course, you said that it's not, we don't have a lot of time, but I on the other hand, like 12 TED is also not less time if you want to really do that. But usually our negotiations are that we come at the end of maybe to end of 2025, and all of a sudden I struggle and I try to come out with a solution. That's always been the problem with the negotiation. So I think this kind of seminars also helps in terms of really shaping that. Because one of the parties said in the Bonn TED 2 that it just feels like we are killing time here, just repeating same things over and over again and not really having the direction where you are going. If that is the case, then it would be very helpful. And I think giving this guidance would be much helpful. And thank you very much for your comments. Now let me go to Mahlet from RMI. Mahlet, you have the floor. Also a few minutes for you.
Thank you, Raju, and really thank you so much, Bertha, for the great presentation. And also, I just want to thank you all for giving me this chance to be on this panel. And I really want to comment this great work. And I can go to my general comments and also being very specific on some of the suggestions or the proposals that you have. So I think first, based on the lessons from the 100 billion goal, this new goal should avoid any potential legal ambiguity. So as it was proposed in your paper, I think the clarity, whether the NCQG focus only on Article 9 or if it should include Article 2.1c as well, should be given, this clarity should be given at the outset. It may not be possible or feasible that we get this decision at COP27, but at least parties should be able to consider this, this issue under the agenda item at COP27. And also consider all the works and processes that could inform this decision, meaning, for example, the work under the Standing Committee on Finance on Article 21C, and also the possible new agenda item, Article 21C, could also influence this decision. And second, as you rightly outlined it, it's very important to give time to all the topics that parties have identified, and also differentiate the technical discussions from the political ones. So as parties have identified this different landscape of issues, it's important that they are given enough time to be discussed at the TEDs and also the formal negotiation sessions. So by dedicating a specific TED for a certain topic as your proposal, it doesn't necessarily mean parties cannot go back to the issues or have further discussion as needed, as you have rightly stated in your presentation and also in the paper. And I think what I would like to comment on one of your proposals, for example, is maybe for TED 5 to focus on how to define needs and priorities of developing countries. In my view, this could be potentially discussed towards the end of 2023, because we had TED 3 that has covered the specific topic. So it would be good to get back to it after deep diving on some of the issues that could inform this needs determination discussion. And another example of one consideration could be the dynamic nature of the goal and how this goal could be, time bound and also be revised and reviewed. In my view, this has a more political element. So, for example, if ministers could agree that the goal should be revised after a certain period of time, at the technical level, parties and also other non-stakeholders could also discuss how this review and also revision of the goal could be taken up. And of course, it will have to come back to the political level for final decision. And also one of the issues which you also mentioned and Maria mentioned is really how do we capture the outcomes of this different processes that we have. We have the submissions, we have the TEDs, and we'll be having the high-level ministerial dialogue soon and also in the coming years. So how could this progress be captured and really build up on the outcomes so that we can reach an informed decision by COP29? So having this different options and really at the COPs to narrow these options is a good proposal and a good way forward. And the fourth issue that I also want to speak to is about the role of the different actors and also processes. Like you said, we don't know how the high-level ministerial dialogue will be like for this one. And it's important that ministers should not just come to read statements as we have like the different high-level ministerial dialogues of different work programs under the UNFCCC, but really to be there and not only to give guidance, but also take some decisions so that we don't hold off to taking all the decisions at COP29. And I think one other important issue that should also be considered in the process is really the role of the co-chairs, how the co-chairs could play a greater role in setting this agenda and also really laying out this milestone and roadmaps, and also how this co-chairs could work with other co-chairs in similar processes, within or outside of the UNFCCC. And also the role of other actors, meaning non-party stakeholders, such as the private sector. It's very important to have them on board and really have them in this technical discussions, at least for their roles and responsibilities. And the other one is also, I think, probably missing from the process is really the submission. Yes, the decision was to have this 2 sets of submissions for 2022. But at least I believe some of the issues, like this landscape of issues that are identified, could benefit from a submission prior to the TEDs or the COP, for example. And then once parties and other stakeholders meet at the TED and also the COP, they could look at those submissions and really build up on that and work on that, because the TED, it doesn't necessarily mean that all the issues could be addressed in one TED. And my last point would be about the linkage with the other processes within the UNFCCC. We have the Global Stocktake, we have the Global Goal on Adaptation, and we have the Glasgow Dialogue on Loss and Damage. So it's very important that there is collaboration between the co-chairs of these different dialogues or bodies or work programs that we have, so that the processes could inform the deliberation of the new goal. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mahlet, for this very important point. And I would also agree that, the co-chairs and others, the complementarity among the processes going forward is very key, because what I've seen, at least in June session, was that some of the co-chairs trying to discuss the same thing in different forums, and they were not talking to each other. And the parties seem to be the same ones talking. So I think they were also seeking for that complementarity or the coherence among the different stream of negotiations. Definitely, we need to have a very focused deep dives. That is, and I would think that towards the end in 2024, they could even have some TED just focusing on the cross-cutting or any leftover issues, or to come back with some of the issues that may have raised in 2022 or early 2023. That will also allow the process to be more robust. Thank you very much. And once again, let me remind you that there is a question and answer chat icon if you want to put your any comments or thoughts into that. And our panelists and also presenter will be able to come back to them. Or if our presenters and panelists want to already address the question that is there in Q&A, please feel free to do so. And let me also tell you that if you, in case you don't want to type there, but you want to directly talk, later on, we'll also allow you to raise your hand and then speak directly to the mic if you have any questions or input. With that, now let me invite Sandra, who is the founder of the Climate Finance Group for Latin America and the Caribbean, just for your 4 minutes of reflection and inputs. Sandra, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Raju, and thanks a lot, Bertha and colleagues from CFAS for the invitation to participate in this very, very interesting conversation. Thanks a lot for this hard work. It is actually very helpful, as my colleague said, like to see all the different elements of the conversation in one place. Thank you so much. I would like to share some thoughts, general comments about the document, as well as some recommendations like to go forward. I would start completely agreeing with the statement about the complexity of this process. The definition of this new goal is going to be extremely difficult, because it's something that is completely different from previous experiences, such as the 100 billion. So the complexity is big, and it is important to start defining the different layers that the new goal has. But at the same time, we have to stay in a feasibility space where wherever it is defined can be achieved. Otherwise, if we create something very, very complex, it's going to be very difficult to achieve. So the complexity versus feasibility, I think it's an important element to take into account. And of course, this idea of the cycling process of the goal, I think it's clear. And in fact, in collaboration with Mahlet and other organizations, we have been working a lot in reflecting about all these areas, and we are going to share some papers that we have been putting together on this bit. But the cycling nature of the goal is also one critical element. What I would like to emphasize, according to the paper, but also based on the TEDs of the technical discussions that we have been having in the last year, I think one of the elements is we have to start talking about the difficult issues. And this is mainly related to the fact that we need to start talking about the number. I know that there is a lot of elements around what are the principles the NCQG should follow, what are the qualitative elements that we have to consider, like to what extent we have to ensure that it's effective, predictable, and others. But I think we have to start definitely talking about numbers, how we are going to create a number that reflects the needs of developing countries. And we know now, based on the needs report that the Standing Committee on Finance created, that there is information, coming from developing countries about how much do they need. We know that it's not enough because not all the countries have been able to determine those needs. And this is part of what needs to happen in the future. But there are numbers that we have, and actually we have been discussing about this. 100 billion as a floor is not enough. Actually, 100 billion as a floor is too low. We know now that more or less countries would need 600 billion per year just as a base to fill the needs. So I think it is important to also bring the quantitative analysis on the table and start discussing what methods, how we are going to use the information that we have to start putting those numbers. So this is the first element. I didn't see a lot of this discussion in the paper, but I think it's going to be very, very important for the coming months. The second element is to what extent the NCQG should respond to Article 9 or Article 2.1c. I would say that should respond to both. The question is how and when and through which instruments. Definitely NCQG is going to be a bridge that will help us to build on top of Article 9, and it's going to help us to work towards Article 2.1c. The critical element is how we are going to build this bridge to achieve both of the articles, and definitely we have to start thinking in the how rather than if should be connected or not. I think definitely has to be connected, but it's a matter of how and what are the mechanisms to connect. There is another element that Bertha was discussing about the balance between mitigation and adaptation. And definitely one of the conversations that happened in the TED, particularly in the last one, it was this NCQG has to recognize the finance gap that exists for adaptation. It is true that in the future, it would be great if we can balance mitigation and adaptation finance, but we know now that even if we double the adaptation finance, the finance for adaptation is going to be still too low in comparison to mitigation. And we believe in GFLAC that it is important to recognize this gap and ensure that the NCQG makes justice to the adaptation agenda, as well as includes the loss and damage as an additional element, not only mitigation and adaptation, but also loss and damage. That is an element that hasn't been very well addressed in the TEDs, and I think this is important to highlight. In terms of what can happen in the coming basically months or weeks in the context of the COP27, I think the high-level session has to be very well organized in a way to address key issues instead of trying to address all the issues related to NCQG, because we are going to have other high-level sessions next year. And it is important to be sure that we progress in elements such as the process, what's next, but also about the number, how we are going to include information, for instance, from the needs, as well as what are the key principles that the NCQG has to follow. So I think we have to really, really push towards an agenda in the high-level session that is not trying to cover all the elements, but those that are very, very critical to continue progressing. And another element that we believe it is going to be very, very important to bring into the COP27 is the element about needs. As I was saying, not all the countries have been able to assess their needs. And this is also in part because developing countries need support to do these assessments, but also we don't have enough guidance. So I think the COP27 can provide some guidance in terms of how to do these assessments in the context of the enhanced transparency framework, as well as it has to send this message to the Green Climate Fund and other mechanisms to support developing countries in assessing those needs. And this is going to be a cyclical element. Every 5 years at least, the needs have to be revised to provide information through the needs report of the standing committee, but also through the ETF, the Enhanced Transparency Framework. So I think it's important, if we want to improve the information of needs, we have to support developing countries in producing those information. And finally, I think the critical element is how we are going to ensure that the future TEDs, the technical dialogues, are helpful and effective enough. The first element is to really work in better dynamics. Better dynamics, not only in terms of the format, but also in terms of the information. Make better and more straightforward questions to start tackling those issues that are pending, not only about the number, but also about the methods, about the sources, and more specific elements that are still flying around without having a very detailed discussion. So I think we have the opportunity to ask the co-chairs and the secretariat to go a little bit deeper and improving the dynamics in content and format, and definitely bring more actors. We are the same people in the room. Of course, many of us have been working in this process for many, many years. So of course, it's part of our agenda, but I think it's very, very important to start bringing more people on board from private sector, indigenous communities, the youth, women groups, and many other groups that are not represented in the discussions. So I think this is going to be critical if we really want to achieve a collective goal. So I'm gonna leave it there, Raju, and thanks a lot for the invitation to comment in this important work.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you very much for raising those very critical points. And I would definitely agree with your estimate on the numbers, that what is the context, because if you look at both the science and the needs, it doesn't match what is being presented currently. So it's definitely going to be very high. And of course, the collective effort is also very important in terms of going this process forward. That is the reason that I think to set this process right, of course, it's been now we're already into the 4th TED, but also getting the process right for the next 2 years is critically important, so that we don't scramble at the end of 2024 what to agree on and then delay this for several years later down the line. So I think in order to avoid that, having this kind of discussions is very important. With that, let me also now open the floor for our participants. And of course, and I see that there are a lot of people who have good experience on this, and they might want to reflect and have their opinion or even have some questions. The Q&A icon is still on. As I said, you're also free to raise your hand, and then our colleague will give you the permission to have your mic unmuted as well. So you can either ask questions directly, or you can put your questions or inputs into the Q&A section. We will have this discussion for next around 20 minutes. I think that's what time we have left for 1 hour, 15 minutes. And we already have 3 questions from John, Abdul Rashid, and also Iari. Our Bertha and others, do you see these questions? Do you want to directly respond to this, or you also want me to read them out? If you have been able to see that you want to react, please do so while we wait for others to put in the questions or raise their hands. Who wants to go first?
I can give it a try at the first one first,
Sure, Bertha, please go.
because I think that came after the presentation, so maybe, but obviously, and then everyone else is welcome to give it a try. So I see that the first question is on the decision of burden sharing. I think maybe because of an issue of time, I didn't mention it, but if I understand your question correctly, we do address that in the policy brief. We think that the topic of burden sharing should be discussed at the technical level, because we think everything should be discussed at the technical level. It's open, no topic should be not discussed because it's technical level. At the same time, the issue of burden sharing for us comes down to what responsibilities have already been established in the Paris Agreement, because we do understand the argument that if the burdens, I mean, there's 2 parts. So obviously, one of them is how to share the burden amongst developed countries, and I think obviously for that we would need to understand what this idea of fair shares is, which it's not something that has any, I think there's any agreement of from any parties of what the fair share would be. I think everyone calculates that or estimates that however they please. So that's one of the arguments. So for the technical level, it would be, well, addressing what does it mean to have a fair share and how then the burden sharing should be established. At the same time, what we've heard in the discussion so far is that is a topic that will be very hard to agree at the political level. And so, though we do think that this is something that should be or could be, if the parties think it's important, discuss at the technical level, we don't see honestly it happening at the political level, especially because then how it comes back to how do you define fair shares. And then for the expected discussion regarding the climate finance new and additional, I mean, I think at a principles level, there's no, and this is obviously how we were like working on based on this assumption. We don't think there is a need for a high level principle on new and additional, because new and additional is it's embedded in the convention and the Paris Agreement. And so, I mean, we would assume that if it's there, it could be restated as, you know, restating what's already been agreed in the past within the convention. But I mean, you know, it would just be restating something that is already an agreement in a sense. So for us, the issue of new and additional becomes less of a principle and more of a technical discussion. How do we address new and additional, or translate that principle that already exists within the convention into a reality? And this is for us where it comes to the topic of defining climate finance and the methodologies, the accounting mechanism, etc., which could be the means to translate what already is a principle into a reality, because what we're missing is not the principle. What we're missing is really translated and principled into something implementable and measurable and, you know, transparent, basically. And this is how we were like working basically under that assumption. So I hope that answers the question, but I think we will give the floor to people if they want to come back on that.
Thank you, Bertha. And in case you have not been able to see some of you have not been able to see the questions there, Abdul Rashid asked, to what extent should the financing needs estimates in the NDCs for low and middle income countries derive the NCQG target? What challenges could inhibit that? And the ERE says, how do you think the NCQG and the loss and damage financing facility would connect? Example, if a window for supporting loss and damage under the NCQG is secured, what role could this loss and damage financing facility play? That's what he asked, just for the panelists and others to hear if they have not been able to see that. I also see the, of course, María, you wanted to respond to that. Please come in.
Thank you, Raju. Yes, so first, some quick thoughts on the first two questions. I agree with Bertha that new and additional for many countries is a given, and that the question is how to translate it into the concrete features of the new goal. And additionally, there may be like two other ways that I can think about on how this can be done. Like the first one is with the sub-targets. We were trying to analyze all the submissions presented by the parties on this topic. And remarkably, all submissions by G77 subgroups and individual G77 countries, all of them are asking for sub-targets on mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage. And this can be reflected there. And the second aspect is on this mix of financial instruments. We already know that grants are very critical for adaptation finance, but they are also very critical for other projects depending on the stage. For instance, for mitigation projects, for the planning and readiness and this stage of the project. So the mix of financial instruments can also be like an element to reflect on these topics. I would also say that with regards to the first question on border sharing, there is a very strong political element. So I do see that it's important to address these kind of questions, this one on border sharing, others about the broadening of the donor base within the high-level ministerial dialogues. And I think it's important to acknowledge that a topic can have technical dimensions and political dimensions, and that there are different spaces to address both and to complement both. On the question of Abdul, what I have been hearing in the last, like this year with TEDs and so on, is some parties are making a difference between costs and needs. So this is like one of the first things to acknowledge. The second thing is that the information that we have on needs, like we have a lot of information on the costs. The IPCC, there's regional information that comes from banks. There are a lot of sources, but the information on needs is very incomplete because we don't have methodologies that are coherent, because there are many challenges on the needs. And there's a risk that we also see that some countries, and there has been some action like around this, some countries are asking for investment plans and climate finance strategies to see reflected those needs. And in our view, although they are critical because they can enhance developing country capacities in understanding and identifying their needs, and many other things, like there is a risk that we see that the provision and the mobilization of climate finance should not be conditioned to their existence. There is an obligation there under Article 9 and so on that should be delivered regardless of these things. And I just wanted to come back on one thing that Sandra mentioned and actually Mahlet too, on this relation between 2.1c and Article 9 of the agreement. And I do agree with Sandra that the question is not if we should have that discussion, but when and how. That decision from Glasgow on this topic, the mandate is very clear that the NCQG should contribute and accelerate the achievement of the long-term goals of the Paris Agreement, including 2.1c. And therefore, there is not a discussion that it should happen. The question is how the NCQG can complement any development of 2.1c within the new goal, acknowledging that probably 2.1c will not end there. It goes way beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahlet. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Raju, and thank you, Maria, as well for your responses. And I think maybe I can, because Maria and also Bertha have responded to the first two sets of questions, maybe I could respond to Ilari's question on how the NCQG and the loss and damage finance facility would connect. So in my view, for example, under the NCQG, there could be a sub-goal for loss and damage, and that finance, even for adaptation, mitigation, and loss and damage could be channeled through different funds, the financial mechanism of the UNFCCC, like bilateral, multilateral, and also from the private sector as well, right? So it's really how this new facility will be designed and which sources of finance will go to this facility and how that will be dispersed will be critical. So I think if the design is in line with what all parties want to see that facility deliver, parties could also be willing to put in money in this new facility. And also it could be linked to other funds or other mechanisms that is already there. So I think this facility could also have, like this financial facility should be able to have adequate, it may not be as adequate as the needs out there, but at least it should have money that will be available for the immediate and urgent needs of loss and damage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mahlet. I hope Yari and others, I think your points were answered. Probably you can also, if there are others who would want to contribute, please come in, either raise your hands. We have like about 7 minutes. This opportunity for you to input. Anybody willing to take the floor? I really don't see the hands there. John, I see your hand. Please take the floor.
Yes, hello, good afternoon. My name is John Norbo. I'm climate advisor at CARE Denmark, and thanks to the responses to my questions on new and additional and burden sharing. Just 2 comments. I think what you say about the right place to discuss new and additional is actually correct. It's part of the discussion of what is climate finance and how do we track climate finance. But I nevertheless think that it would be important in a paper like this to state very clearly that the expectation is that this important principle is part of that discussion, as we know that some parties, they really want to forget the words new and additional. So that was one point. On burden sharing, I understand it's left out because it's such a political issue. But on the other hand, I think it's also a technical issue in the sense that when we look at the experiences with the $100 billion target, we can see that it was not, I mean, the money was not delivered. And then from a technical perspective, you can begin to discuss why was it not delivered. And one of the reasons is that all rich countries, they could say that the others, they should deliver more for some kind of reasons. I mean, seen from that perspective, it's also technical. Wouldn't it make sense to have a discussion about burden sharing as a tool to ensure better delivery? Yeah, that's all.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much for those suggestions and input. I think that was very helpful. And of course, the new and additional is a very important element that needs to be considered. Well, now we are coming towards the closer, but I see a hand from Leticia. I will give you the final questions or comments to make, and then probably Mahlet, the final one, and then close this meeting. Leticia,
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Raju, and hi, everyone. I was wondering, I was thinking, you know, going back to this first flow chart that you very brilliantly highlighted, where all the issues are, etc., and trying to make sense out of complexity. And I was wondering, how much do you reckon is this, the technical issues, how much does it hinge on having a definition of climate finance? We are so far in the process. Does it still matter? How much could it be, an obstacle? Or how do you see, I'm just thinking in terms of risk to where do you see the crunching points? I was thinking maybe the climate finance definition could be one, but perhaps you have others that you think oh, if we don't resolve this one, there is a domino effect or something like this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leticia. Mahlet, please come in. You want to also respond to that, or probably very briefly?
Yes,
Maria can come in.
Yes, I'll be very brief. And I think maybe just to respond quickly to Leticia's point, I think, if we are going to wait for the definition of climate finance to be agreed by parties, I don't think we can move forward on many of the issues. So I see it a parallel process while the SCF is working on the definition issues. But of course, through time, we may get this clarity and maybe one definition for climate finance, or maybe we would end up with definitions of climate finance that could help to operationalize the mobilization and provision of climate finance. And I think one thing which I want to stress as well is we know what the technical issues are and what the political issues are. Many of these issues are really political, and we've been discussing them for many years. So it's very important that, the political issues are resolved at the political level and really leave the technical issues to the TED, especially, the TEDs is not only the negotiators, but it's you have different actors. So it will be just discussing, there will be no decision from the TEDs, but at least there will be options to take it forward. So I think it's very important that we use the limited time we have efficiently so that the political discussions is taken to the political level. Thank you.
Very important point. Thank you, Mahlet. Maria, you have the last words.
Big responsibility. So I just wanted to say on this question that I can think about two different approaches. The first one is when we talk within the context of 2.1c, it doesn't matter because we know that all finance, regardless of it is public, private, national, international, all finance should be aligned with the Paris Agreement long-term goals. But if we talk about climate finance in the context of Article 9 and delivery and mobilization, it matters a lot because that definition will give us the ground for tracking progress and tracking accountability in the long term. As Mahlet mentioned, this is something that has been on the table for many, many years with no agreements, but yeah, and discussions and delivery must continue regardless. And I think that another issue that I just want to highlight is that for me, it's a balancing act that needs to be done within the new collective goal between what is ideal, what is feasible, what is desirable, and what is feasible. And in this regard, try to understand when and where this discussion should happen, because my feeling at some point is that there are many expectations that the new collective goal will solve all the challenges of the financial climate system, of the UNFCCC and outside the UNFCCC. And maybe it cannot do it, but it can provide anchors and signals for other agenda items within the UNFCCC. So for instance, on the climate finance definition, the question would be where and how, and also beyond the UNFCCC to other processes that need to happen outside. For instance, the one on debt, like the huge discussion that we had on debt. Yeah.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you very much for those important elements that you have raised. In fact, this is a very important process, looking both from quantitative side, qualitative side, and that lot of learnings that can definitely be drawn from the 100 billion experience. I mean, we don't have to come from scratch, because there people have so much of experience to really learn. It's about the political commitment. It's just not about the technical work the technical people can fix. Well, they can really have these deep dives and come out with all these elements, but it's also a political process, the political commitment that we have to deliver at the end of the day. I think this technical process and the political process going together can only achieve what we want to achieve under the NCQG, because money is a big thing if we want to really address climate actions on the ground, and impacts are happening all around the world already. So in that, it's a very critical topic. So that's why there's also a lot of interest from diverse stakeholders, how this process will actually go. So it is very important that the process is set right from the beginning, and then these learnings are being embedded as we move forward. With that, let me thank all our panelists and the presenter. Thank you, Bertha, for your excellent presentation and giving the gist of this paper. Also, Maria, Mahlet, and Sandra for your excellent inputs. All those attendees who have really contributed. I hope that this seminar has been very helpful for you. As I said in the beginning, if you want to have the access to the full paper, please go to our website, cfas.info, and you'll find it there. It has been a good discussion. We'll need to keep this momentum going. Hopefully see many of you at the COP there, and also at the TED, of course. With that, let me thank also our GIZ, who has been financing this work going forward. It's been a pleasure working with GIZ in this policy briefs. Thank you very much once again. And thanks to all, and have a good day or evening. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.